Alright, I'm back. So I haven't been able to post many videos on YouTube because I basically moved all the way across the country early last summer and haven't been set up to be able to do this sort of thing, but hopefully I'm good to go now, and I've got a new camera I'm trying out, seeing if it'll work out for me, and get some videos made. Now if you're new, this is the first video you watched, I just kind of fly off the cuff here. I don't do any kind of script or any really editing either. I just say what I'm thinking at the time. I may do a few takes to try to get it organized, but that's just how it goes. It's going to be off the cuff, so be prepared for that. Now, today's video is going to be a comparison of various aftermarket triggers available for the AR, and for a point of comparison, I've got a Milspec trigger that comes with your typical build kits, and we'll use that as a baseline comparison. So, first things first, I'll just show you which triggers we got available here. This one right here is an Geissele SSA trigger. This one right here is a Geissele SSA trigger, but I have put a reduced power trigger spring in it from Wolf, and also a reduced power disconnector spring, which causes the overall trigger pull to be lower than the standard SAA or SSA trigger. I also have here a Geissele G2S, which is basically their lower cost option that's very similar to the SSA. And here I have a Larue Mbt trigger, and off the table, not enough room, this is a ALG ACT trigger. Now, final trigger would be standard Milspec trigger. This is the trigger that came out of a build kit from CMMG. Now, I have found CMMG Milspec kit triggers to be the best out of the box kit build kit triggers you can get. They're just a standard style. They're very smooth for what they are. I haven't ever felt any grit with them at all. So this is a very good standard Milspec trigger, to be sure, but the other ones I tend to find have always been gritty and rough, and that's one reason why people want to upgrade their triggers. So, since I said we start with the point of comparison, this will be the one we'll go with here. Now, first off, we'll give the trigger pull here. Get this started. I'll do a couple pulls just to be safe. That is 5 pounds, 3 ounces. £5, 5 ounces. Now, this little getup I got here, I got when I bought my MBT trigger. They had a sale going with it. I found that it actually adds a little bit of pull weight because of the plastic isn't perfectly straight here. It kind of worked a little bit, I guess, in the molding, and it pushes in just a bit, but it adds about half a pound. But the readings I was just reading on that were about similar to what I had before when this trigger was mounted in a rifle. This does have a reduced power trigger spring from Wolf, the return spring. That is it. Before, it was about 6 pounds or a little bit over, and the new trigger spring reduced the pull weight only about half a pound tops, and it really didn't improve the smoothness any. This trigger was actually really smooth. Didn't really feel the need to polish it, and other than the fact that it's just a long kind of a trigger pull due to, you know, the standard Milspec type trigger, and a little on the heavy side for what I wanted, I decided to upgrade my triggers. So first off, we'll start with a standard SSA. Most everybody is familiar with these triggers. They've seen them around. Many people have probably even felt them, but they don't know how they compare to other triggers, and having a hard time deciding. So hopefully this comparison will help. So, things I like about the SSA trigger. By the way, everything has been safety checked. I'm going to be using the same upper for all these demonstrations. Didn't feel like dragging out a bunch of rifles down all the way into the garage. So, first things first, the trigger pull on these things is really, really nice. Being a two-stage trigger, you have a little bit of a lighter take up, and then you hit the wall. And as you can see, there's not a whole lot of movement, very little movement in the trigger overall, as you can see. Then you hit the wall. Now, oh, there you go. Lied to you. And a little bit more movement because safety safety was on. So you got a little bit more movement, but still, it's not a lot of movement, but there's some movement there, and then it's designed to help keep you safe with a semi-automatic trigger like this, especially for a rifle designed for fighting uses in defense. So you get a little bit of pull there, it helps make it drop safe, things like that. Now, pull, you hit the wall, and then the pull, you get just the tiniest little bit of give right before a nice clean snap. That is by design for this trigger. It's just a little bit of extra safety precaution for a combat focused trigger. This is derived from the full auto version Geissele makes for the military. So let's go into trigger pull here. £4, 12 ounces. £4, 11.4 ounces. So very consistent trigger. That's one thing I like about these Geissele. I've always found them to be very consistent. Something else I found, a little trick, use a very light viscosity grease on your sear surfaces. That will lighten your trigger pull and actually smooth it out without having to do anything physically to the trigger. My Mbt trigger here, this last one I actually did a comparison before and after with using grease, and when I had just used a good quality oil, the trigger pull was right about 4.5 pounds, or maybe up closer to 5 pounds, but then it dropped dang near to 3 pounds just by using grease on it. So a grease does a really good job at reducing the friction of sliding surfaces. That's why it helps so much with trigger pull weight. So as you can see, very nice, clean trigger with a little bit of give for extra safety for a combat focused trigger, but still very clean, very easy to pull off some precision shots with if you need to. So next, for a point of comparison, we'll do the SAA or SSA trigger that I have put some different springs in. I have yet to be able to fill a SSA enhanced trigger, so I am unable to give you a point of comparison there. But people say it's very similar to a standard SSA, but just lighter. So this might actually be very similar to what you could expect in that situation. Kind of hard to do this at a weird angle. There you go. There we go. All right. Now, take it off of safe. And because it's basically the same trigger, you get the same amount of movement, and then this one, this particular example, has a little bit less give to it before the break. it's almost imperceivable amount of give. It's very, I mean, almost non-existent, and you really only notice it when you're pulling really, really slowly. I would almost consider it practically no give at all, but just the tiniest amount, as you see. Now, as far as trigger pull weight, what did adding the Wolf reduced power trigger spring and disconnector spring get me? £2, 13 ounces. £2, 15 ounces, and I find it usually is right around £3 mark for this trigger. This is a trigger goes on a rifle that is a precision focused build, so I wanted a nice clean lightweight trigger without getting too light. I don't like getting really light on a semi-auto trigger rifle. Now for the Geissele two-stage, the lower cost version of their SAA. They do this by slight design changes to make it quicker and easier to manufacture, and they only do spot testing rather than doing individual tests. Geissele individually tests every single trigger they sell for their main lines of triggers, and then they give them an individual serial number. They do not do that for the G2S. It has it doesn't have the built-in internal locking spring built into the hammer, the pin in place. It uses a circlip or some kind of a spring clip that just slides onto the side of the hammer, and that will hold in your pins. It works very well. I've never had any issues with it. It's just slightly different, easier to machine and easier to assemble. Now, funny thing is, I think my G2S here, this particular example, is actually better than my regular SSA trigger. It seems to break cleaner, but it just has a slightly heavier trigger pull overall, but it has a little less give. It's actually a little cleaner. I like it a lot. So you have the typical bit of first stage here, and then a tiny, the least amount of all the Geissele triggers I think I have, except for maybe that one might have about the same or a little less. I mean, it is so clean of a trigger. It is really nice. I really like this thing a lot. And this is actually the lower for my home defense rifle, and I like the little bit of extra weight that this one gave me. Let's see the pull weight for it. £5, 1 ounce. That one went to £5, 9 ounces. I just been out pulled it, so I'll do it one more time. Right about £5. I tend to find it was £5, a little bit more the last time I was checking the pull weight. And I like having about a 5 to a little 5.5 pound trigger for a defensive rifle. I think it's a really good pull weight for that kind of purpose. And so if you want a Geissele without spending the full Geissele price, I highly recommend the G2S trigger. It's a very good trigger for less money, and they go on sale quite frequently, and I see them for 125 to 100, between 150 to 125 ish kind of price range. Now, the Larue Mbt. First off, it has a slightly altered trigger bow than the Geissele's. The Geissele's have more of the standard Milspec kind of a feel to them as far as the way the trigger is shaped. but the MBT here has a wider, flatter face to it. It's not, the curve isn't as pronounced, and it's much flatter here. These are cut from a piece of stock, and they don't, so they cut them very flat there with it, and it's a little bit wider. Some people don't like it because the edges are a little sharp. It doesn't bother me. I haven't really noticed any issues with it. It's just different. And as far as trigger pull, it's a two-stage as well, just like the Geissele's I have. I find the trigger pull to be much crisper. The final break is a much crisper break than the standard SSA trigger is. Now, it's also lighter. As I said earlier, the trigger pull was getting close down to 3 pounds, which I consider way too light for a straight up, just a carbine fighting rifle. That's getting down into something I would consider a DMR type of trigger pull weight, you know, or even a precision shooter trigger pull weight, like if you were thinking of it in as far as a military capacity, something that your DMR or an special purpose rifle would have for more precision shooting, especially with the pull weight being what it was. But it was a little higher when I was using just plain oil, but still under 5 pounds. Still, I'd consider it a very good DMR rifle type trigger. Put it on fire. As you see, very similar trigger pull to the Geissele's as far as the trigger pull distance for the first stage, and then you hit the wall at a very crisp break. I don't really feel any give or any kind of creep at all. It is very crisp, very nice trigger pull. Now, as far as your pull weights on this one, the flatter face allows you to get a little lower on the trigger bow as well, which does aid in your pull feeling lighter. 3 pounds, 6 ounces. Three pounds, 5 ounces. Once again, like the Geissele's, a very clean and consistent trigger. You don't get a lot of variance in it. It's very consistent in the trigger pull. You can see it's close to 3 pounds in weight. When I have fresh grease in it, this one's actually been taken to the range, and a few hundred rounds have been fired through it since I last cleaned up the rifle. This is in a bit of a DMR kind of a setup. It's I wouldn't say DMR, maybe. It's the rifle I have this in, and it has a 1 to 4 power scope on it. So a little bit more precision kind of shooting setup than the typical red dot basic carbine for defensive use, things like that. Now, I love this trigger for that role. It is excellent. I can't express how nice this trigger is. I actually might even like it a bit better than the Geissele's, and that's saying something because I love my Geissele triggers. That's why I own 4 of them. And the other trigger's on an AR-10 rifle, and it is just a standard SSA. So I didn't feel like bringing it on down. So this one, though, it is lighter than I would like. So I don't recommend it for a defensive rifle at all. It is up around 4.5 pounds, though, or a little bit more than 4 pounds, a little less than 4.5 maybe, with just using oil instead of the grease of the sear surfaces. So you can get a little bit more weight with it, but like I said, it's a little crisper and lighter than I would like for this type of rifle. Now, to the ACT. Now, this is an enhanced Milspec trigger. This is other than just sticking with a kit trigger, this is the cheapest option you're going to get. Several people make versions of similar versions of this kind of trigger. I think ALG was one of the first. Palmetto State Armory offers one. It's cheaper. It's about half the cost, but I also hear that it's not as good. It's much better than most Milspec triggers, especially the cheaper kits that you can buy, but not as good as an ALG. So what you get with this one, this is my dedicated 22 build, if you don't recognize it from one of my other videos. That's a bit how much of a trigger snob I am. I even put something custom even on the 22. Now this thing, it is very, very Milspec. It's just cleaner, maybe a little bit shorter pull than your typical Milspec trigger. Let's see here, give it a little pull back. A little quicker, I think, of a trigger than most Milspec triggers, and very clean, very smooth. You got the take up and some creep, and then a nice break when it actually does break. So let's give it a pull on our scale here. £6, 6 ounces. So getting close to 6.5 pounds. That was right at 6 pounds. One thing about Milspec triggers, they tend to not be quite as consistent as most custom triggers will be. But I tend to find this thing typically is around the 6.5 pound range. Very clean. Now, this is straight up. I haven't done anything special to it. This is exactly how it came from ALG. And if you were to ask, comparing that to my CMMG, it's better. Its overall pull is shorter, a little bit cleaner, and a little bit smoother. But if you don't want to get a custom trigger, spend a little bit extra money on a CMMG kit than you would on some of the cheaper parts kits you can find. I've used CMMG kits on more than one occasion, and every one has been very smooth, a little bit heavier, around the 6.5, 7 to 7.5 pound range from the ones I've used. But they've all been smooth, very clean triggers overall. So that's what I would recommend for somebody who doesn't really want to spend extra money on a customized trigger. Just buy a CMMG kit and go with that. If you're looking to spend a little bit more, ALG has their QMS, I think is what it is, quality Milspec trigger. I've never felt it. I can't imagine it being too much better than a CMMG is, being just a plain standard Milspec, just made well. If you're looking for just a little bit cleaner of a trigger, a little bit lighter, a little nicer, but you don't want to spend a lot of money, I recommend the ACT trigger as a very good, cheap alternative to some expensive triggers, especially for a defensive rifle or a basic plinker. It's a very excellent trigger for that kind of use. Now, if you want to do home defense, but you want something nicer than the ALG triggers, I just recommend the two-stage, the G2S. I love mine. It's a great trigger without spending the typical Geissele prices, especially if you wait for a sale. Like I said, you can usually find them between $125 on sale to $150, depending on where and the sale, and usually they're about $160 normally or so. So look around, you can find one, and that is an excellent defense self-defense rifle trigger. And if you're looking for maybe just a little bit nicer, a little lighter, you can move on up into the SSA, but I don't really recommend it for home defense because they typically are a little bit less than 5 pounds, I find. But like I said, I use grease on my triggers, so they naturally come out a bit lighter anyway. usually about half a pound to a pound. So it would probably be closer to what you would expect for a self-defense trigger, and a very good option, but you're going to spend a little bit more money. And like I said, it's mostly just knowing that you bought the nicer version of the trigger rather than getting one that I would consider really drastically superior of a trigger. Now, if you do want to set up a precision kind of a setup, and you want to save a little bit of money, but you want the a Geissele, the SSA with the lower power trigger spring and disconnector spring from Wolf, I have not had any issues with it. I tested it, drop tested it on the ground. I dropped it from several feet onto the butt, which and the muzzle, which is going to be the directions that are going to cause difficulties if you're going to have a problem with a drop causing the hammer to fall and set off around. Those are going to be the worst ones. I did it several times onto a hard surface just to check. Never had a single issue. I consider it safe, but your mileage may vary, and always be careful with that. If you're going to do any modifications, remember that's all on you. You're responsible for any modifications you do. So I can tell you my results. I can't guarantee my results will reflect your results. Now, the Larue Mbt Trigger. Prices, let me remind the price on the SAA. Right now, I keep seeing them on sale for about $175. Even the SSA Enhanceds are going for about that same price, when usually it used to be closer to $200 for the SSA and closer to $225 to $230 for the SSAE. With the SSA going on sale more often and always cheaper still. But now prices are leveling out due to the current environment, political environment, and gun purchasing environment, I guess you could say. Sales are down, so people are putting sale prices on parts to get people to buy. So now is a good time to purchase a trigger if you're looking. So Mbt prices on these from Larue will be $125 or $200. The difference is Larue offers what they call a I can wait price, and then the normal price. The normal price is you pay that price. Within the next day or two, they will box up a trigger and mail it to you. So you will get a trigger within a few days, depending on how long your typical shipping time is going to be, and how quickly, how much you pay for your shipping for what speed. But then they have the I can wait pricing. What that means is they make these triggers in batches. They'll set up their equipment, they'll make a big batch of triggers, and then they retool their equipment for making some of their other products. So the normal price, they'll keep some, and they try to keep some in stock where they can send them out to somebody who wants them. If you do the I can wait price, you wait until the next batch. They have a good rough frame of idea of how many they should make. They'll like, we have this many orders, so we'll make that many plus this many for the people who come along and want one right away. So you'll have to wait, and it can be a few weeks, a month, maybe a little bit more. I don't know how quickly they cycle through, but I've typically seen, the longest I've seen somebody mention they waited was about 4 or 5 weeks before they got it. So I would say the 4 to 6 week range, like you typically get with some kind of mail offers. So there you go. What would I recommend this trigger for? As I mentioned earlier, I would use it in a kind of a DMR style rifle, something more precision orientated than your typical door kicker carbine or self-defense carbine. Excellent trigger for that. So now we've gone over ACT, the CMMG, and finally we went all through to the MBT. So I believe that is everything I have to say. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. If you know anybody who's interested in getting a new trigger, share my video with them and maybe it'll help them out. So there you go, and hopefully I can look forward to